The invitation. The small church was quiet that afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the wooden pews with soft colors. Pastor Daniel, an elderly man with gentle eyes, hummed an old hymn as he arranged the hymn books near the altar. The creak of the main door broke the silence. Pastor Daniel looked up to see a young man, Tunde, standing hesitantly in the doorway. His shoulders slumped, his hands buried deep in his pockets, and his gaze fixed on the ground. "Welcome, son. Come in," Pastor Daniel called out warmly. Tunde shifted uncomfortably, but didn't move further. I don't belong here," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The pastor paused, studying the young man. "Who told you that?" Tunde shook his head, still not meeting Pastor Daniel's eyes. "I've done things, bad things," he said, his voice laced with guilt. "I can't even pray. People like me don't belong in church." Pastor Daniel smiled gently and began walking toward him. "Son," he said softly, "the church isn't for perfect people. It's a hospital for the broken." Tunde finally looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. "But how can God accept me?" His voice cracked. "I messed up. I've gone too far." Pastor Daniel stopped and pointed toward the large wooden cross hanging above the altar. The sunlight seemed to illuminate it. "That's why Jesus came," he said. "He doesn't wait for us to clean up our lives. He meets us as we are, broken, sinful, and hurting. You don't have to fix yourself before coming to Him. He'll do the fixing." Tunde's face softened, the weight of his guilt pressing harder on his heart. "Even me?" he asked quietly, tears welling up in his eyes. Pastor Daniel stepped closer and placed a comforting hand on Tunde's shoulder. "Especially you," he said. "Come as you are, son. Let Him do the rest." Tunde stared at the cross, his breath shaky. Slowly he took a step forward, then another. The young man made his way to the altar where he knelt. His voice broke as he began to pray softly, words he hadn't spoken in years. Pastor Daniel stood nearby, bowing his head as a soft peace filled the room. Somewhere, as if whispered by the wind, a voice seemed to echo, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Tunde lifted his tear-streaked face, and for the first time in a long while, his heart felt lighter. The church had welcomed him, and so had God.